V. The summer sun beat down on the crowded streets of London as James Mitchell adjusted his backpack, walking alongside his wife Sarah and their two teenage children near Buckingham Palace. At 45, the retired Marine's military bearing was still evident in his straight posture and alert eyes, even while playing tourist with his family. "Dad, can we get closer to take pictures of the royal guards?" Daughter Emma, pointing toward the iconic soldiers in their red uniforms and tall bearskin hats. James smiled, leading his family through the throng of tourists. The atmosphere was festive, with visitors from around the world taking selfies and children pointing excitedly at the palace gates. Street vendors sold Union Jack flags and royal-themed souvenirs, their calls mixing with the general buzz of conversation in dozens of languages. As they approached the palace gates, James noticed a young man in a hoodie moving oddly through the crowd. Despite the warm weather, he wore a black jacket with the hood pulled low over his face. Something about his movement pattern triggered James's combat-trained instincts. The way he weaved through groups of tourists, his eyes darting between bags and cameras. "Sarah, keep the kids close," James murmured to his wife, who recognized the tone in his voice from their years together. She quietly gathered Emma and their 16-year-old son Tom nearer. The royal guards stood at their posts, maintaining their famous stoic expressions and rigid posture. Japanese tourists posed for photos nearby, and a large tour group from Germany listened to their guide explain the palace's history. The hooded man was now only a few yards away, pretending to check his phone while eyeing an elderly woman's expensive camera. James watched as the man suddenly lunged forward, shoving roughly past a group of schoolchildren. His target wasn't the elderly woman after all. It was a young Asian tourist who had just pulled out her wallet to buy a souvenir. The thug's shoulder slammed hard into James as he tried to grab the woman's bag. Time seemed to slow down, just as it had during James's combat deployments. He felt the familiar surge of adrenaline, but years of training and experience had taught him to channel it properly. The royal guards remained at attention, bound by their strict protocols not to intervene unless there was a direct threat to the palace or royal family. The young tourist screamed as her bag was yanked. The thug's force knocked her off balance, sending her stumbling backward. Without thinking, James stepped forward to catch her before she hit the pavement, while simultaneously assessing the situation with the tactical awareness that had kept him alive through 3 tours of duty. "Tom, get the police." James called to his son, who was already pulling out his phone to dial 999. The crowd around them erupted in confusion, some people backing away while others pulled out their phones to record the incident. The thug, realizing his grab had failed, turned to run, but found his path blocked by the growing crowd. His hood fell back, revealing a young face twisted with panic and anger. "Get out of my way," he shouted, trying to shove through the wall of tourists who had inadvertently surrounded him. James helped the young tourist steady herself, quickly checking if she was injured. She was shaken but unhurt, clutching her bag tightly to her chest. Her eyes were wide with fear and surprise. "It's okay," James assured her in a calm voice that carried authority without aggression. "You're safe now." He positioned himself between her and the increasingly desperate thug, who was now looking for any escape route. The royal guards remained perfectly still, but their eyes tracked every movement. From the corner of his vision, James could see palace security personnel speaking into their radios, and in the distance, police whistles were already sounding. Sarah had moved the children behind a stone pillar, where Emma was comforting a crying small child who had been frightened by the commotion. Tom was waving to direct the approaching police officers to the scene. The thug made one last attempt to break free, charging forward with his shoulder lowered like a rugby player. James recognized the stance immediately. It was the desperate move of someone who knew they were cornered. What happened next would be captured on dozens of tourist phones and security cameras, becoming a viral sensation that would spark discussions about justice, veterans, and the proper use of force. But at that moment, as James prepared to respond to the charging assailant, he wasn't thinking about any of that. His mind was clear, focused on one simple mission: protecting the innocent people around him while using only the force absolutely necessary to resolve the situation. The confrontation was about to take an unexpected turn that would leave a lasting impression on everyone present that sunny London afternoon. As the thug charged toward him, James Mitchell's military training kicked in with the precision of a well-oiled machine. Time seemed to slow down as his mind rapidly processed the situation. Civilians all around, Royal Guards maintaining their posts, and a desperate criminal making his last stand. Instead of meeting force with force, James smoothly sidestepped the charging man's path. Years of hand-to-hand combat training had taught him that an opponent's momentum could be their greatest weakness. The thug, expecting resistance, stumbled forward off balance. James used this moment to position his foot just so, causing the man to trip over it and sprawl onto the pavement. "Stay down," James commanded in the same tone he'd used with new recruits in the Marines. His voice carried natural authority without aggression. "The police are already here." The gathering crowd gasped and murmured, phones recording every second. The Royal Guards remained statue still, but their eyes showed approval of James's measured response. Sarah watched proudly from her position with the children, recognizing the calm expertise her husband was displaying. The thug, however, wasn't finished. Scrambling to his feet with a bloody nose from the fall, he pulled something from his pocket that glinted in the sunlight. Several people screamed as they spotted the small knife. This is where training makes the difference, James thought, maintaining his defensive stance. He could hear police sirens getting closer, but right now, his focus was on keeping everyone safe for the next crucial moments. "You don't want to do this," James said clearly, his hands raised in a non-threatening yet ready position. "Think about what happens next. Using that knife changes everything about your situation." The young Asian tourist whom James had protected earlier had backed away to safety, clutching her bag. Tom had successfully guided 2 police officers through the crowd, but they were still pushing through the dense mass of people. The thug's hand trembled as he held the knife. Up close, James could see he was younger than he first thought. Probably not more than 20. His eyes darted frantically between James and the approaching police, like a cornered animal. James recognized the look. He'd seen it before, in much more dangerous situations overseas. This wasn't a hardened criminal. This was a scared kid who'd made bad choices and was now making worse ones out of panic. "I've been where you are," James said quietly, just loud enough for the thug to hear. "Not exactly here, but in moments where the next decision changes everything. Put it down, son. Let's end this the right way." A Royal Guard officer, now off duty and in civilian clothes, had appeared at the edge of the scene. He watched with professional interest as James handled the situation. The officer's presence seemed to add another layer of pressure to the tense standoff. The thug's eyes flickered to the knife in his shaking hand. Sweat dripped down his face despite the cool breeze. "I can't go to jail," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "You're going either way," James replied calmly. "The only choice you have is how. Make it smart. Make it safe. Show everyone watching that you can make the right decision when it matters." Emma, James's daughter, watched breathlessly from behind the pillar as her father dealt with the situation. She'd never seen this side of him before, the warrior beneath the devoted dad who helped her with homework and made terrible dad jokes. The crowd had grown silent, sensing the delicate balance of the moment. The Royal Guards maintained their posts, but their presence added gravity to the scene. Police officers were almost there, carefully making their way through the last ring of onlookers. In that tense moment, James noticed something in the thug's stance change. The young man's shoulders dropped slightly, a subtle sign that the fight was leaving him. James had seen this countless times in training, the moment when someone realizes they're beaten and accepts it. The knife clattered to the pavement. James moved swiftly but calmly, kicking the weapon away while keeping himself between the thug and the crowd. The police officers finally broke through, quickly taking control of the situation. As they handcuffed the young man, James felt Sarah's hand slip into his. He squeezed it gently, letting out a long breath. The Royal Guard officer who had been watching approached them, a knowing look in his eyes. What happened next would forge an unexpected connection between a retired Marine and the elite guards of Buckingham Palace, but for now, James was simply grateful that his warrior's instincts had helped him resolve the situation without anyone getting hurt. The off-duty Royal Guard officer who approached James extended his hand with a look of professional admiration. "Captain William Hayes," he introduced himself. "That was some impressive work there, mate." As the police led the young thug away, the crowd began to disperse, though many lingered to share their videos and discuss what they witnessed. James's children, Tom and Emma, hurried over to their father, both talking excitedly about how he handled the situation. "I recognize those moves," Captain Hayes continued, his trained eye having caught the subtleties of James's technique. You've had close protection training, haven't you? James nodded, still keeping aware of his surroundings out of habit. Marines, 20 years. Spent some time with diplomatic security too. The Asian tourist whom James had protected earlier approached them, bowing slightly. Thank you so much, she said in accented English. I'm Mai Lin, from Singapore. You saved not just my bag but maybe my life. That man had a knife. Sarah put a comforting hand on Mai's shoulder. Would you like to sit down? You've had quite a shock. She gestured toward a nearby bench, away from the remaining onlookers. As they moved to the bench, Captain Hayes pulled James aside. Listen, there's something you should know. That young man you stopped, we've been tracking him and his group for weeks. They've been targeting tourists around the palace, but this is the first time one of them has pulled a weapon. James's expression turned serious. A group, you say? How many? We've identified at least 5 regular members, Hayes replied quietly. They usually work in pairs, but today's incident was different. He was alone, more desperate than usual. 2 Metropolitan Police detectives approached their conversation. Mr. Mitchell, we'd like to get your statement, if you don't mind. And we have some questions about what you observed before the incident. James spent the next 20 minutes describing every detail he'd noticed. The thug's behavior patterns, his scanning of the crowd, the way he'd selected his target. His military training had taught him to notice things others might miss. Meanwhile, Emma and Tom had become minor celebrities among the remaining tourists. Your dad was like a superhero, one young boy told Emma, his eyes wide with excitement. Not a superhero, Emma corrected him, remembering all the times her father had talked about responsible use of force. Just someone who knew what to do. The detectives were particularly interested in James's mention of the group Captain Hayes had referenced. We've had reports of similar incidents, one detective explained, but witnesses are often too shaken to provide clear descriptions. As they talked, James noticed something that made him pause. A young man on the opposite side of the street was watching them intently while pretending to take photos of the palace. He matched the description Hayes had given of one of the group members. Without drawing attention to his observation, James casually repositioned himself to keep the suspicious individual in his peripheral vision while continuing his conversation with the detectives. One more thing, James added, smoothly incorporating his new observation into the discussion. These types of groups often have spotters watching for police response times and security patterns. Someone might be doing that right now. The detectives exchanged knowing looks. One of them discreetly spoke into his radio while maintaining a casual demeanor. Captain Hayes, catching James's meaning, kept his back to the street while asking, the suspect mentioned a meeting point when you were talking to him. Could you mark it on this tourist map? As James pretended to study the map, he quietly updated them on the spotter's movements. Within minutes, plainclothes officers had moved into position, ready to follow the observer when he left. Mei Lin, still sitting with Sarah, was providing her own statement to another officer. I travel alone often, she explained, but I'd never experienced anything like this. Mr. Mitchell's response was so calm, like he knew exactly what would work. Sarah smiled, watching her husband work seamlessly with the authorities. That's James. He always says the best response is the one that prevents the next incident. As the afternoon wore on, what had started as a simple act of intervention was developing into something larger, a potential breakthrough in the ongoing investigation of organized tourists targeting around London's major landmarks. James's strategic response had not only resolved the immediate situation, but was now opening doors to addressing the broader problem. The real work was just beginning, and his experience was proving more valuable than anyone could have anticipated. 2 hours after the incident, James Mitchell found himself sitting in a conference room at the local police station. Maps and photographs covered one wall, showing various tourist hotspots around Landry-Simulons. She announced to the assembled team, "It's a flat above a closed shop in Southwark." Captain Hayes, who had joined the briefing due to the proximity of the crimes to Buckingham Palace, leaned forward with interest. How many suspects are we looking at now? CCTV footage confirms at least 6 regular members, Thompson replied, pointing to grainy photos on the wall. The young man from today's incident, Marcus Turner, was their newest recruit. He's already talking, hoping for a lighter sentence. James sat quietly, taking in the information while Sarah and the kids waited in a comfortable room down the hall. His military experience told him there was more to this story than simple opportunistic theft. "Mr. Mitchell," Thompson turned to him. "Marcus mentioned something interesting during his interview. He said they were being pressed to collect more than just money and valuables. They were supposed to grab phones and passports specifically from certain types of tourists." James's eyebrows raised slightly. "Identity theft?" "We think it's bigger than that," Hayes interjected. "Several diplomatic personnel have reported suspicious activity around their residences. We believe these street crimes might be a cover for gathering intelligence." The room grew quiet as the implications sank in. What had started as a tourist targeting operation was revealing layers of complexity no one had anticipated. A young detective burst into the room, slightly out of breath. "Ma'am, we've got movement at the Southwark location. Several individuals are loading bags into a van." Thompson moved quickly to the door. "Right, we move now. Mr. Mitchell, thank you for your assistance. We'll take it from here." But James cleared his throat. "Detective Inspector, if I may, I noticed something in Marcus's behavior that might be relevant. The way he handled that knife. It wasn't street fighting. That was military-style training, though poorly executed." Hayes straightened in his chair. "Are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that whoever's running this operation has a background similar to ours," James confirmed. "The patterns, the coordination, the specific targeting, it's all too organized for common thieves." Thompson paused, considering this new information. "Would you be willing to act as a consultant on this case? Your insights could be valuable." Before James could respond, Sarah appeared at the door. "Sorry to interrupt, but Tom's found something interesting." She held up her son's phone. "He's been going through the video he took, and there's a detail you might want to see." Tom had captured not just the confrontation, but also the moments before it. Playing the video frame by frame, they could see a brief exchange between Marcus and another man, one who matched the description of a suspected ringleader. "That's him," Thompson said, excitement in her voice. "We've never gotten such a clear image before. Tom, this is excellent work." Emma, who had followed her mother, spoke up. "Dad, remember what you always say about patterns. I noticed something too. In all those photos on the wall, there's the same coffee cup from the same shop in the background." The adults turned to look at the CCTV images. Sure enough, in several shots, the distinctive logo of a small coffee shop was visible. "It's a meeting point," James realized. "They're using it to pass information and assignments." Thompson was already mobilizing her team. "Hayes, coordinate with Palace Security. We'll need coverage on all potential exits from that area. Mr. Mitchell, would you mind staying a bit longer? Your family has quite the eye for detail." Sarah smiled proudly at her children. What had started as a frightening incident was turning into an impromptu family lesson in observation and civic duty. As the police prepared their operation, James watched his kids enthusiastically sharing their observations with the detectives. Tom's video skills and Emma's pattern recognition were proving unexpectedly valuable to the investigation. "They take after you," Sarah said softly, squeezing his hand. "Always watching, always helping." The afternoon sun was starting to fade outside the station windows, but inside, justice was gaining momentum. What had begun with one retired Marine's intervention was expanding into an operation that might finally bring down a sophisticated criminal network. James Mitchell had planned for a simple family vacation in London. Instead, he and his family had become key players in unraveling a mystery that reached far beyond the streets around Buckingham Palace. And somehow, he knew this was just the beginning. The evening was settling over London when Detective Inspector Thompson's operation sprang into action. James and his family watched from the safety of the police station as multiple teams moved into position around the Southwark location. While monitoring the operation through radio communications, Captain Hayes suddenly straightened in his chair, staring at. James turned, studying Hayes's face more. "Different uniform, same mission," Hayes grinned. "I diplomatic staff when everything went sideways. Never got to thank you properly." Sarah watched the exchange with interest. James rarely spoke about his missions, but she remembered 2012. He'd come home with a commendation he'd never displayed. Through the radio, they heard the first teams moving in. Target vehicle in sight. 4 suspects attempting to flee through the back alley. Thompson grabbed her coat. "Hayes, with me. "Mr. Mitchell, please stay here with your family. You've done more than enough already." But before they could leave, another voice crackled through the radio. "Suspects are splitting up. Two heading toward the river, two toward the underground station." James and Hayes exchanged knowing looks. "They're using scattered evacuation protocols," James said. "Military tactics again." The coffee shop, Emma suddenly interjected. "If they're using military protocols, they'll have a final fallback point. Somewhere they think is safe." Hayes quickly pulled up a map on his tablet. "The coffee shop your daughter noticed. It's perfectly positioned between all their escape routes." Thompson made a quick decision. "Hayes, take a team to the coffee shop. I'll coordinate the river pursuit. Mr. Mitchell, I know I said stay here, but given your experience—" "I'll go with Hayes," James nodded. Turning to Sarah, he saw understanding in her eyes. "Be careful," she said simply. "Children, let's see if we can help monitor those CCTV feeds with the technical team." As James and Hayes rushed to their vehicle, the Royal Guard officer explained how he transitioned from military police to palace security. "After Kandahar, I realized how crucial it was to protect both people and information. These criminals were chasing. They're after more than money. They're collecting data." Arriving near the coffee shop, they parked discreetly and observed the seemingly innocent establishment. Through their earpieces, they heard updates about the ongoing pursuits. "Two suspects apprehended by the river team," Thompson's voice reported. "No sign of the others yet." The coffee shop was still open, with a few customers visible through the windows. James noticed something odd about their behavior. "Look at the man by the counter. He's been stirring that coffee for 5 minutes." "And the woman in the corner," Hayes added. "She has a perfect view of both exits." Just then, Tom's voice came through their earpiece. Thompson had patched him into the communication system. "Dad, checking the shop's social media. They post staff photos every month. That barista isn't in any of them." James felt a surge of pride in his son's detective work. "They've infiltrated the staff. This isn't just a meeting point, it's their command center." Hayes quietly coordinated with nearby units while James continued observing. The fake barista was becoming visibly nervous, checking his phone repeatedly. Movement at the back door, Hayes whispered. Two men in delivery uniforms were quickly walking toward the shop's service entrance. "Those are our runners," James confirmed. "They changed clothes somewhere between here and the underground." What happened next unfolded with military precision. As Hayes's teams moved to secure the exits, James entered the shop as a casual customer. The fake barista recognized him instantly from the palace incident, his face draining of color. "Quite a coincidence," James said calmly, "finding you here. Though I suspect there are no coincidences in your operation." The would-be escape through the service entrance was thwarted as Hayes and his team caught the disguised runners. Within minutes, the entire fake staff was in custody. "Just like Kandahar," Hayes remarked as they watched the suspects being led away. "Though I remember more shooting and less coffee back then." Back at the station, Emma and Tom were excitedly sharing how they helped track the suspects through social media and CCTV. Sarah hugged James, noticing how the professional soldier in him was already fading back behind the devoted family man. Detective Inspector Thompson was beaming. "We've been after this group for months. Never imagined it would take a family of tourists to help us crack it." "Not just tourists," Hayes corrected. "A family of observers, and one very experienced warrior who knows exactly when to step in." As the evening drew to a close, James realized that some of the best missions were the unexpected ones, especially when shared with family. The next morning, the Mitchell family's London vacation took an unexpected turn as they walked into New Scotland Yard. The case they'd helped crack had opened up into something much bigger than tourist theft. Detective Inspector Thompson led them into a briefing room where several high-ranking police officials and intelligence officers were gathered. On the screens were documents and photographs recovered from the coffee shop's hidden office. "Thanks to your family's observations," Thompson began, "we've uncovered a sophisticated intelligence-gathering operation. The tourist robberies were just a cover for collecting diplomatic information and access codes." "Ja. The press is already interested in this story," one of the officials mentioned. "Especially the part about a tourist family helping to bring down an international crime ring." Sarah noticed James tense slightly. He'd never been comfortable with publicity. But before he could respond, Emma spoke up. Could we use this to help other tourists? She asked. Maybe teach them how to stay safe when they travel. The room fell silent, considering her suggestion. Captain Hayes, who had joined them from Palace Security, nodded approvingly. The young lady has a point. This could be a perfect opportunity for public education. Over the next few hours, the Mitchells worked with the police media team to create a series of tourist safety tips. James's military experience, combined with his family's fresh perspective, helped shape the message in a way that was both practical and accessible. By afternoon, local news crews had gathered outside the station. Instead of focusing on the dramatic arrest, they were now covering the launch of a new tourist safety initiative. James stood back, letting Thompson handle the cameras while his family demonstrated simple awareness techniques. See how Tom's holding his camera? Emma explained to a group of visiting students. Always keep it close and stay aware of your surroundings. Sarah added tips about family safety she'd learned from years of being a military spouse, while James quietly advised security personnel on recognizing professional criminals versus ordinary pickpockets. The coffee shop, now cleared as a crime scene, became a temporary educational center. Local business owners gathered to learn about spotting suspicious patterns and protecting their customers. Hayes brought in some off-duty Royal Guards to share insights about situational awareness. It's not about being paranoid, James explained to the group. It's about being prepared and aware. The same skills that help soldiers stay safe can help anyone navigate unfamiliar situations. Word spread quickly through London's tourist districts. Hotel managers and tour guides requested training sessions. What had started as one family's interrupted vacation was evolving into a community-wide movement for safer tourism. Mei Lin, the tourist from Singapore who'd been targeted in the original incident, returned to share her experience with a group of solo travelers. Thanks to Mr. Mitchell and his family, I learned that staying safe isn't just about avoiding danger. It's about understanding your environment. As evening approached, the Mitchells sat in a small cafe near their hotel, watching the impact of their experience ripple through the city. News screens showed clips of their safety demonstrations, while tourists practiced the awareness techniques they'd shared. Dad, Tom said, scrolling through social media on his phone, our safety tips are trending. People are sharing them all over the world. James smiled, watching a group of tourists confidently navigating the street outside, clearly implementing the strategies they'd learned. Sometimes the best way to fight crime isn't just catching criminals. It's empowering people to protect themselves and each other. Detective Thompson joined them for dinner, bringing news that several other cities had requested their training materials. You've started something important here, she told them. Something that goes beyond just catching one group of criminals. Sarah squeezed James's hand under the table. Their London vacation hadn't gone as planned, but they'd made a difference in ways they never expected. As night fell over the city, the Mitchells could see small groups of tourists and locals alike practicing their new safety awareness skills. The streets felt different now, not because they were safer from criminals, but because people were more confident, more aware, and more connected to their surroundings. You know, Emma said, watching a family much like theirs confidently crossing the street. Maybe this was an even better vacation than we planned. We didn't just see London, we helped make it better. James couldn't have agreed more. Sometimes the greatest impact comes not from the battle itself, but from what people learn from it and share with others. 1 week after the incident, the Mitchell family stood at Heathrow Airport preparing for their flight home. The past 7 days had transformed their London vacation into something none of them could have predicted. Captain Hayes and Detective Inspector Thompson had come to bid them farewell, along with Mei Lin, who had changed her travel plans to help with the tourist safety program. The final numbers are in, Thompson said, showing them her tablet. Tourist-related crimes around major London landmarks have dropped by 40% this week alone. Your safety awareness program is working better than we hoped. James watched as nearby travelers moved through the airport with new confidence, many openly practicing the awareness techniques his family had helped develop. Groups kept together, stayed alert without being anxious, and maintained the calm vigilance he'd spent years teaching his own children. Look, Dad. Emma pointed to a wall near their gate. A large display showed the newly implemented Mitchell method of tourist safety, complete with simple graphics and clear instructions. Similar displays were being installed at major tourist sites across London. Your family's legacy will help protect thousands, Hayes said, handing James an official letter. "The palace wants to recognize your contribution. There's going to be a formal ceremony next month, if you can return." Sarah smiled, seeing her husband's surprised expression. "I already arranged time off from work." The children's school approved their absence for the ceremony too. Tom, who had been quietly working on his laptop, spoke up. "The video tutorials we made have gone viral. Cities in France, Japan, and Australia have requested permission to adapt them for their tourist areas." Mei Lin stepped forward, tears in her eyes. "I'm flying home tomorrow, but thanks to your family, I'm not afraid to travel anymore. None of us are. That's the real victory here." James thought back to the moment when the thug had confronted them outside Buckingham Palace. What could have been a simple case of stop crime had become something far more meaningful. "The best victories," he said, thinking out loud, "are the ones that keep helping people long after the initial battle is over." Detective Thompson nodded in agreement. "The criminal network we caught was significant, but teaching people to protect themselves and each other, that's changed everything. Tourism is up, crime is down, and communities are stronger." Over the airport speakers, they heard the first call for their flight. As the family prepared to say goodbye, a group of royal guards in civilian clothes approached, led by a senior officer. "Mr. Mitchell," the officer said formally, "Her Majesty has taken personal interest in your family's contribution to public safety. The ceremony next month will include recognition from the Crown itself." Emma gasped in excitement, while Tom tried to maintain his teenage cool despite his obvious pride. Sarah squeezed James's hand, knowing how much this recognition would mean to him. As they made their final goodbyes, James noticed something remarkable about the airport crowd. People weren't just moving through their travels. They were aware, alert, and looking out for each other. Strangers helped families keep their groups together. Tourists shared safety tips they'd learned, and there was a new sense of community among the travelers. "That's the real victory," James told his family as they walked to their gate. "Not catching criminals or getting recognition, but seeing people take care of each other." Sarah smiled, watching their children walk ahead, standing taller with the confidence of knowing they'd made a real difference. Sometimes the biggest impacts come from the smallest moments of doing what's right. As their plane took off over London, the Mitchells could see Buckingham Palace in the distance. The place where their ordinary vacation had turned into an extraordinary mission to make the world a little safer. "Dad," Emma said quietly as they reached cruising altitude, "can we come back soon? I feel like our work here isn't finished." James looked at his daughter, seeing the same dedication to helping others that had driven his own career. "The work is never finished," he replied, "but we've given people the tools to continue it themselves. That's the greatest victory of all." As London disappeared beneath the clouds, the Mitchell family knew they were leaving behind more than just memories. They had helped create a legacy of safety, awareness, and community that would continue to grow long after they were gone. The real victory wasn't in stopping one criminal or preventing one crime. It was in showing people everywhere that when they work together and stay aware, they can create a safer world for everyone. That James realized was worth more than all the medals and ceremonies in the world.